Welcome to Creating Calm Parenting with Mind, Body, and Spirit. I'm Corinne Cayce, your co-host. I'm an integral leadership coach, a mother of two, and a lifelong student of the Edgar Cayce readings. And I am here with my friend and co-host, Arlene.
Hi, Corinne. Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Arlene Dijamco. I'm an integrative physician, a pediatrician, and a cranial osteopath and mom of four. And so happy to be here with all of you today. We have another great topic for you. It is on the meatless diet with perspectives from the Cayce readings, including when and why you might consider being on a meatless diet. So before we dive into that, Corinne is going to start us off with our opening meditation.
Yes, thank you, Arlene. So as we get started, let's just take a moment to tune into our bodies. If you can close your eyes, feel free to, or just let your attention turn inward and find your feet on the floor or wherever your feet are. Wiggle your toes, maybe move your ankles a tiny bit. Let your awareness scan up through your shins and your knees, your thighs. Find your seat, your hips, your low back and your belly. Find your whole back body stretching up through your spine and your shoulder blades. And over to the front of your torso again, your beating heart. Let your awareness scan down through your arms, your elbows, your forearms, your wrists, and your hands. Coming back up to your neck and your throat, the base of your skull, your jaw, your ears, the back of your head, the top of your head. And let your awareness cascade down your face like a waterfall, loosening and relaxing all the muscles that we use so much to express ourselves in the world, in your forehead, around your eyes, your cheeks, your mouth, your chin. And then just let your awareness be with your breath for a moment. As you inhale and exhale, finding that steady rhythm. All right, thank you so much. So, as Arlene mentioned, we're going to be talking about a meatless diet and what the Edgar Cayce readings have to say about when and how and why we might want to do that. And to start us off, we'd like to begin with an excerpt from the readings, as we always do. And this reading excerpt comes from 341-37. And 341 was Arlene Cayce, who is my grandfather. And he is asking... He said, the reading says, you will have before you the entity, 341, present in this room, who seeks guidance in his efforts to bring the physical and mental forces of his body in attunement with the spiritual creative forces within himself and the universe. Please give him that counsel which he needs at this time and answer the questions which he will ask, which is sort of a beautiful orientation that I think so many of us are working towards. How can we bring into attunement our physical and mental forces with our spiritual creative forces? And then he goes on to ask this specific question: should this body gradually discontinue the use of meats in its diets? And the answer that comes is, if that is where the spirit leads the body for the cleansing, that there may be the better activity of the forces in the mental and spiritual nature, then lead in that direction. Meats do not defile the body unless there be the inability of the changing of the vibrations in same. For oft we find the necessity of returning to same for strength in the physical. So that's a wonderful response that we want to really dig into, right, Arlene? There's a lot there to start us off. Yeah?
Absolutely. And what I love about that excerpt is that it's not an absolute. And so there's some choices from the soul of a person and their consciousness and what's going on in their lives, their perspective of their desires of like what kind of diet that they would like to work with. As long as they're able to digest it, then they can choose, do I do a meatless diet or don't I do a meatless diet? It's like, what is your soul's calling?
Mm-hmm.
And he does say, as long as you can digest it, as long as you can
Right.
change, shift the vibrations, assimilate. And so in reading various excerpts on the meatless diet and from the Cayce readings, I saw some trends. And
Mm-hmm.
so when to consider a vegetarian or meatless diet. And one was if there were digestive issues, but not every digestive issues. I tended to see that there were digestive issues, especially of the stomach, the duodenum, or part of the small intestines.
Mm-hmm.
If there were areas of the solar plexus, which is right in that upper center of the abdomen, or some
Mm-hmm.
lumbar plexus, having to deal with digestion. And then when anyone needed certain kinds of cleansing, so if there were poor eliminations, you're constipated, not going, of course, it makes sense to get more fruits and vegetables in the diet, or there was any liver congestion, and that was described as an auto intoxication. So your liver wasn't detoxifying properly, and the toxins were recirculating around. And so those could lead to all kinds of issues, from sensory issues to like eye problems to respiratory issues in the lungs,
Mm-hmm.
to the need to rebuild like cellular forces. And
Mm-hmm.
rebuilding cellular forces meant it could be like needing to rebuild the blood or
Mm-hmm.
the nerve supply. And that's interesting to me too, because sometimes when you think of needing to rebuild the blood, a lot of times people automatically go to, oh, you need more meat, but it's
Mm-hmm.
not the case for every individual. And if there were problems digesting meat, then perhaps it's like better to get those minerals through vegetables to help rebuild the body, whether
Mm-hmm.
blood or nerve, like cellular forces.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was such a wide variety of issues where a meatless diet was recommended. There was another woman with pelvic issues, and she sounded like she was pretty sick and just needed a rest. So it was almost a period of like a light fast, not a complete fast, but to avoid meats for a time period to let her body rest, let her digestion rest, so it wouldn't be irritating to those organs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting. I think when it's so common today for there to be sort of these diet fads that are sort of thrown out as like for everyone and anyone to go ahead and give a try, that and what we kind of lose in that process is, I think, this kind of core concept in all of the Edgar Cayce health readings, that like our relationship to our bodies, and what that means is like our willingness to pay attention to what it's telling us, to what we feel coming through, at like a way of noticing our energy levels or how our bodies feel, but also an intuitive attending to like,
Mm-hmm.
this sounds good to me, or this is good to me, is just sort of essential to healing overall. And that if we outsource that wisdom, to some, what I'm sure whatever expert or whoever is coming up with these diets, then we're like imagining that we're cutting off this connection that we have to our own knowing and wisdom for guiding us in what we might actually need related to our health.
Mm-hmm. And it may depend on what's going on in your life for a time period too. So, and sometimes like you needed a meatless diet to support more mental activity. Say if you're a professor type,
Right.
or you needed more meat if you had more physical activity. And it says, like, he has in the excerpts, it says that you might need to change your diet depending on what's going on. This is
Right.
from reading 1554-6. And the question is my vegetarian diet good for me, and should I stick to it? And the answer was, rather, as has been indicated, this from the material angle is not an absolute necessity, but in all good conscience, keep that as thy soul. We didn't say heart, thy soul desires, Vegetables are nature's way, the natural, the correct, the cleansing. Keep it then, but these are as to the needs of the self, depending upon the manner of expending energies.
Mm.
So long as there is the expending of self in mental, yes. When it becomes active in great physical exertion, as it will, in that your experience, then there will be the needs for some changes to be made. And so you have to ask yourself, like, what kind of energy do you need for your activities?
Yeah.
And I love
Yeah.
that. You're following the seasons of your own life.
Right. I know. I love it as well. And something that stood out for me in that excerpt too was speaking specifically to vegetables. Vegetables are nature's way, the natural, the correct, the cleansing. And I know that that touches on what I've heard in the readings a lot around the importance of eating food that is fresh, that is in season, that is grown
Mhm.
as close to you as possible. And we've talked about this before on on our podcast. And I think that this time of year is a particularly great time to keep that in mind. I mean, so often now in our world, vegetables are traveling very long distances from very far away and picked at times that's not the prime ideal time to be harvested. And the more that we can kind of tune into what is fresh and growing around me right now, whether it's something that you can grow in at your own house or nearby local farms, or looking for what's in season and really trust learning to embrace that in certain ways of like what's growing right now and how can we eat it and work with it, include it in our diet in ways that our whole family will enjoy. And in where I am on the East Coast right now, this is a perfect time to kind of really clue into that because our growing season is just coming online there. And there are so many leafy green vegetables that are starting to be fresh and in season. And we want to jump on that. As my dad used to say, the life force is what we're after as much as possible. And I was seeing that in readings in preparation for this podcast as well, that there's something vital and life-giving about eating foods that are, whether they're, I mean, I think the same can be said for meat as well to a certain extent, right? Like eating locally sourced meat and looking for vegetables in the same way is very helpful to our digestion and sense of well-being.
Yes, considering the energetics or that life force of our foods is a very different way of deciding what to eat. And
Mm-hmm.
from that excerpt where he says, we didn't say heart, it was what the soul desires. And
Yeah.
so what's that difference? What's the soul desires versus what the heart desires?
Right. I know. I think that is such a fantastic question. I think for me, when I think about heart, there's like a more emotional feeling component to it. And that we can be like longing for something that would feel good, but that may not necessarily be in that more deeper attunement with soul, which to me has more to do with like an attunement and an integration of the body and the mind and the heart and the spirit, and more of a directional orientation that where we want to be headed in our
Uh-huh.
lives. So like being willing to kind of ground into the wholeness of ourselves, not necessarily what emotionally at the moment might feel
Yeah.
good.
That's such a great way to look at it, because it's like what the soul desires is really more that big picture for the soul growth, what's actually
Yes.
going to be nourishing for you,
Yeah.
versus that emotional, what does the heart desire, and more talking about heart from emotional perspective. Because
Yeah.
when we think about when we get into certain kinds of cravings, then they have a huge emotional component to it. And
Mhm.
when I'm talking to patients about just considering the diet and trying to break it down to
Yeah.
see why they're having certain cravings, a lot of times it's because of an emotional component from childhood that they feel this longing for
Yeah.
food, and they're trying to fill in something that feels like a lack.
Yeah.
And that's a very different way of choosing or reaching for a food than considering a more bigger picture. What does your soul desire for nourishment of your soul growth?
Right. Right. And that distinction is being made really clearly here, between heart and soul. And then also in the same excerpt between mental and physical activity. So, kind of correlating that, like, are you in your life right now wanting your mind to be sharp or awake or engaged in a certain level? Or are you needing to put out a lot of physical
Mhm.
exertion to kind of, I mean, in family life, there are times where
Mhm.
we're doing that. We're trying to help everything happen. It requires a lot from our bodies, and just like acknowledging those differences and honoring them through the choices we make around food. And I feel like in our culture, we're pretty meat based a lot of
Mhm.
times. And it's just kind of like automatic that we go to the meat, including the
Mhm.
meat in whatever
Mhm.
way that looks like, and being willing to kind of engage more deeply with thinking about, like, what does our life actually feel like right now? What season are we in terms
Mhm.
of levels of exertion, like you were saying, Arlene? And then also more widely, like, what's seasonally happening around us, and how can we make just small incremental changes that are in attuning
Mhm.
ourselves and our children and our family life together, and then noticing, how does that change how we feel in our lives right now, and making adjustments. And so, just to circle back and bring forward again, Arlene, the distinctions that you were noticing, the patterns that you were
Mhm.
noticing for when
Mhm.
meatless diet would be recommended in terms of digestion, there being
Mhm. Yes.
meat. Yeah,
It was,
please.
like, certain kinds of digestive issues, especially with the stomach and the small intestines,
Yeah.
when you needed some kind of cleansing. So, if you had poor eliminations, basically constipation or liver congestion, and you have signs of liver congestion with all different kinds of ailments.
Right.
Um, and when you have more mental activity than physical activity. And
Mhm.
again, it's not an absolute, it's following the seasons of your own life and
Yeah,
your constitution and what calls to you, because it's not an all or nothing approach, not even for one person.
totally.
And sometimes, because I know there's all these different diets, and I know people are talking about the carnivore diet, which is completely the opposite of this meatless diet,
Right.
and considering like why that would be helpful for some people, but putting it into a bigger picture and bigger context, because Casey says it's like there are certain times where you might need to make changes in the diet,
Mhm.
and then so consider that. But some of these diets are not necessarily meant to be for long term. They're
Mhm.
maybe for like short periods of time,
Mhm.
maybe to do a cleanse, or maybe to rebuild the body, and
Right.
then to change the diet as your life changes.
I know, and I feel like as a mother, this is such an important reminder for me, because I will get kind of in a rut around, like, what my children's healthy diet is supposed to be. And that means finishing, whatever, like, we're eating this, and this, and you need to go ahead and do it. And me kind of breaking that down and listening, for example, my daughter is saying, like, I don't want to eat the chicken. I don't want to do whatever. And me being like, oh gosh, is she going to be getting enough protein, or having enough energy to do what she needs to do? And then in thinking about all this, I'm like, well, if she's having a lot of end of year tests right now going on, and that's requiring like a lot of mental exertion on her part, there's kind of like at
Mhm.
an intuitive level, she's like, I don't want that heavier stuff right now. I want to be able to be up here in my mind more easily. And maybe that's an element of what's going on. So the flexibility that I can bring to that. And likewise, if my son is like pounding back, 3 hot dogs or whatever, like, not being like, oh my gosh, where are the leafy greens? How is this going to be okay? But noticing, like, he's like having a lot of physical exertion in particular that's happening in his life right now with sports tournaments and whatever. And that's okay for there to be these kind of shifts and changes to what they're eating and how they're eating, and me not being too stuck in my ideas of what it's supposed to look
Yeah.
like, and let it be okay.
I see that in my own kids too, where sometimes like, no, no meat, it's too heavy. And then other times you're like, how are you eating so much food?
Right.
And,
Yeah.
and it's amazing. And somehow with that kind of variety, even though it doesn't seem consistent, but over a longer period of time, they're
Yeah.
getting everything that they need.
Right.
And And I was looking in the Cayce readings of like his comments on the meatless diet. He calls it avoiding meat, meatless. They don't usually use the terms like vegetarian or vegan. And I know that with a vegan diet, like vegans need to watch out for getting enough B12. But in the Cayce readings, it didn't specify that. So I just want to mention that like as a heads up, because there's so many nuances to the directions and suggestions in the readings, and it was so individualized for what was going on for a person at the time. But that soul's desire and the soul's calling of like what you're called to eat, and like watching our kids and seeing that they intuitively can pick, yes, sometimes it's not the soul that's calling and it's their heart's desire.
That's right.
So we won't make an absolute there either.
No, not an absolute.
But I do love talking about that spiritual understanding. And there was another excerpt from reading 443-6. Would you like me to read that one?
Sure.
The question is, does meat affect one's spiritual understanding? And the answer is, if there is that consciousness in self, that it is affected, but rather as the conditions, the experiences, the surroundings of each soul become spiritualized. For it is not that which goeth into a man that defileth him, but that which cometh out. But to attempt, where the bloodstream, where the body, building forces of the nature's warriors within self have been builded for generations, those that have required the stability or stamina of meat to relieve self of same entirely is to take from the vivifying influences of that body. For spirituality by the flesh is as the spiritual life in its essence, a growth.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, so what I hear being said in here, just to kind of move up from the bottom, it's, is saying at one point, if you remove meat entirely, all of a sudden from the diet, it can, it won't be helpful. It's builded for generations, a familiarity with eating meat and digesting it, and that we need it to have stamina. So to relieve it entirely is to take from the revivifying influences of the body. So it's the body's ability to like sustain and come back, like would be diminished if they took meat out. And then really opening up to, I think, what we've been talking about this today throughout the conversation of it, it's not that which that goes into it's not what you put in that will defile you, but that which comes out, which to me is like the words, the way that you're choosing to act and speak. And
what it means to you.
Yeah, exactly.
Because there could be other families where it's, they don't eat as much meat and they're more used to that, and it means it's something that's very meaningful for them, and that would, you would consider that differently.
Right, absolutely. So there's not like a one way is the right way answer that we can give to this question of what's needed, but really doing more of kind of the hard, messy work of like learning about yourself and your family and paying attention in a kind of consistent, mindful way around what it feels like to be you and your body and making adjustments accordingly. And then there are these kind of guiding principles that Arlene has been talking about around like, if you're noticing that you're having like digestive issues, if you're having trouble with eliminations and that sort of thing, then this might be taking meat out might be a helpful thing to try.
Yeah. Or if you have irritations in the body, you just need to give the body a rest, then maybe for a period of time, it could be helpful. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing. And so it is asking us to grow with it. Like it's a different relationship to food that is ever evolving and changing with us, just as the seasons change. And that's actually a much more natural way to exist than to have something that's absolute.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is almost kind of like a paradigm shift in the way that we're relating to ourselves within our own mind around this kind of thing. So, like, wanting to have a meatless diet, like maybe to help cleanse for a bit, if that's something that you're feeling like you're wanting, then going that direction for a while it does have a cleansing impact and does simplify often the digestive process. I mean, every individual is different, right? And there's all sorts of like allergies that people have, or like, specifics to your own body, but generally it can be easier on the digestive system. And also noticing like if for you there's a natural inclination toward needing to exert your mind and your mental forces as opposed to the physical, then like eating more lightly and vegetables as opposed to meat, can help with that. And then the sort of bigger awareness as well of eating that which has life force as much as possible, what is as fresh and as in season and grown as close to where you live, is also going to give a lot of those minerals and vitamins and vitality that comes from the vegetables that we're eating as well.
And to appreciate and take your time, because as Cayce says, chew your food well, and even your water. It's just to take it in mindfully with appreciation, and you start that assimilation process from the first, even before, and the first bite, and appreciating the food.
Yeah. So just brushing on some of those, I know in sort of every health conversation that Arlene and I have, we're touching on those kind of big core underlying principles in the readings around circulation, assimilation, relaxation, and elimination. Today, we're kind of honing in on elimination and assimilation more. And then Arlene's with the taking our time, also with that relaxation of like being willing to give space. That's another sort of chronic thing that we're like rushing through our food and our meals and taking it on the go, and like being willing to take some time and relax around it also helps with that. Not only mindfulness awareness of like, how does it feel for me to be eating this? What am I noticing about my children and my family as we are enjoying this food? Is it working or not? How do we feel afterwards? Like, we need that time to be able to make those observations that help guide the choices that we're making.
Well, thank you, Corinne. This is a great topic.
I know, such a wonderful reminder in all ways. And thanks so much for digging deep into the readings with me, Arlene, and bringing this forward. I'm looking forward to our next conversation
on breathing exercises, specifically ones that were mentioned in the Cayce readings.
Yes. So that will be next. And also, before we conclude, I wanted to mention that this summer, Arlene and I are doing an online course together to really bring some of what we talk about on this podcast into your family. We'll be doing it's a 4-week consecutive, only online, Creating Calm Learning Lab course that will take an hour and a half once a week to all come together. It will be live. Arlene and I will be there, and we'll be kind of making highly applicable some of these ideas that we talk about from the Cayce readings to be able to put them to use in your own families. So if you're interested in that, please, you can read more about it on www.edgarcayce.org in the events section. And you can also register there if you'd like to join us for that this summer. We're so excited about it. So we're looking forward to talking with you again so soon. And thank you so much, Arlene, for this time together as always.
Thank you, Corinne. Thanks, everyone.